That Don't Sound Right is a podcast about talking the way we did before the internet, when you could not prove anyone right or wrong.
All the expertise was contained in the people involved with the conversation. I'm Peter.
I'm Cecil, and I hope you enjoy our conversations. And as you listen, if you find yourself silently saying, "That don't sound right," send us a comment. You're one of us.
He says, I have no idea how I stumbled across this. But guys, this is brilliant. I'll tell my friends about this. Welcome back to another episode of That Don't Sound Right, podcast about talking. We're your co-hosts. I'm Peter Bielman.
And I'm Cecil Davis.
We're just trying to have a conversation without Googling or fact-checking. We might say something that makes you want to Google it. If you want to, that's fine. But if you're around some friends and they say something that don't sound right, just challenge them on it. See if you can work out the details.
Yeah, it just gives you an opportunity to have the conversation going. We have a special guest wandering through the Camel City studios tonight. My dear wife, Christy.
Hello.
Hey, welcome to the show, Christy. And so it's simple. We're just trying to have a conversation. We're talking, but tonight, this time we're talking about podcasts. It turns out we get a lot of questions about our particular podcast because when people hear that we have a podcast, some of the things they say include the words "that don't sound right." But with Christy in the Camel City studios, I just want to pose this question to you.
Okay.
What are your reflections on our podcast?
That it's grown from sitting under our carport talking about moonshine.
That's true. What was that conversation like? Were you a part of that?
I was. We were sitting around with our small group, and you guys have probably told this story that Peter was talking about moonshine and how you can't make it. It's illegal, and Cecil was pretty sure that you could make it and that it was legal. And somebody said, well, I don't think that sounds right.
Yeah.
And then that's how it was. I was like, wow. Or somebody said, wow.
And then you said, y'all just need to record these conversations and put them on the air.
Yeah, it goes back to me. I'll take credit.
Yeah, and you should. So as you sit in the living room, what are some of the facial expressions you have as you hear us talk?
Some bad dad jokes circulating sometimes.
Really, I can't imagine that really goes on at our podcast.
But it's fun. It's fun to listen. I like to play you guys when I take our dog around the block for a walk.
Oh, that's right. In fact, you have it kind of timed.
Yeah, I have. And when it goes a little long, when I get back home, I'm like, this one was a little bit long.
That is a really good metric for us to use, Cecil.
It actually is a good metric.
It's the dog walk. Well, yeah, I tell you what, I've got a lot of people that tell me that it's the right length because it's during their commute.
There you go.
Or it's during their walk.
There you go.
It's just the right length. And we're all about brevity and simplicity.
Speaking of brevity, that would be a great time for me to go see. I need to go check on Camille because her shower is not
brief.
It's not brief. It's not brevity.
So tonight we're going to talk about podcasts.
Yeah, what is it about the podcasts that you want to talk about?
What doesn't sound right? So first of all, what happens, I think, is people come up and they ask us, they said, you guys have a podcast. Because you're an engineer, I'm a pharmacist, neither one of us are broadcasters.
That's right.
Reporters, we didn't go to journalism school.
I certainly don't write much.
Yeah, and so, people come up and say, well, you guys have a podcast. Yes, we have a podcast.
We do have a podcast. We're an engineer and a pharmacist who now have a podcast.
And but how do they hear about the podcast usually?
Well, it's unusual because we're really bad at promoting it.
How bad are we, Cecil?
Well, we had a comment this week from a guy who stumbled upon us.
Oh man, that was
it was a great comment too.
I just saw it today. He sent it last Saturday, and I just saw it today. And his name's Jake. Shout out to you, Jake. I won't give you your last name. You probably want to stay anonymous. But Jake said, after hearing or seeing our podcast on YouTube, so we have it on all the different platforms. So wherever you listen to podcasts, you're able to listen to us. YouTube is one of them. He says, I have no idea how I stumbled across this. But guys, this is brilliant. I'll tell my friends about this. Cheers.
Thank you. That was a great comment.
That was a great comment.
Usually people stumble onto our podcast. It's not because we've promoted it necessarily.
Right. And some people stumble and fall and they move on.
And they move on. But you pointed out last week the podcast has grown from just really one listener to we have what we feel is a good base now of listeners.
Well, that's one of the questions you get, right?
Right.
So we've written down some questions that you and I kind of typically get, and we're going to go ahead and answer those tonight, right?
So the next question I get is, does anybody listen or how many does anybody listen or how many people listen?
Right. And it's fun that we have this platform called Podbean where we have who hosts our podcast, and we're able to see actually where those podcasts are being played, at least through Podbean, and how many downloads are occurring. And that's kind of a gauge of how many listeners we have.
Right. And it'll pull all of our stats from our other platforms because like you said, we're available on all the major platforms.
Right. So the answer to the question is, it looks like we're running in the 90s now.
Right. Yeah, you will usually get a solid 90 per episode.
Whereas this time last year, we were probably in the 20s. Right? So
probably. Yeah. So I feel like if we get a listener, we keep a listener.
Yeah. Here's an example. My manager at work just told me today that he has finished listening to all of our episodes.
We should have an achievement pin for when you do that.
He thought his idea is to make some merch.
To make some merch.
Yeah, that we have like a T-shirt that says "I listen to them all."
Oh, really? That's good.
Is that
we
good?
Need to get with our graphic designer.
We'll have to get with our
away.
That's right, and our merchandise tester to test that one out. Which, by the way, if on an average of 20 minutes a podcast, 76 episodes, that's 25 hours of listening.
Wow, a full day of listening to us talk.
So if you want to listen to us for a full 24 hours, we're here for you.
That's a little scary. We have created 25 hours of content.
Isn't that crazy?
Content's king.
There's a lot of things that don't sound right as we talk, isn't it?
There really is.
What are some other questions?
People who find out that I have a podcast, for some reason, or that we have a podcast, feel like they need to apologize for not listening. Or they'll start out with an excuse like, I don't know which platforms it's on.
Right.
That's my favorite.
Oh, yeah. It's fine that people don't. It's fine that people that know that we have a podcast don't listen to podcasts. Because not everyone, it's just not a format not everyone is, connects with, right?
Right. And so I tell people, you don't have to apologize for me for not listening to my podcast. There are thousands of podcasts that you don't listen to. It is okay.
We're in good company.
We're in good company. You do not have to listen to the podcast. You don't have to know me and listen to the podcast.
That's right. That's not a requisite of our friendship.
No. But don't use the excuse that you can't find it because it is.
That's right.
Just say I don't listen to it.
Just straight up, it's like, I don't listen to you guys.
All right. So the next question we get, I think, is, do you guys make money?
Yeah, that's a great question.
It is a great question.
Because you kind of think about some of the bigger podcasts that you hear on the radio, or even the real popular ones on Apple.
Right.
And you gotta assume that they make money, and then you hear about these YouTubers, these influencers that make a lot of money, and then these influencers on TikTok making, millions of dollars, right? And
I think we should point out that you have encouraged us to get a TikTok account started. We've not done that yet.
I haven't done it yet because the issue is you got to make a video. It's not going to do this on the TikTok.
Right.
And by the way, it's not called the TikTok.
The Facebook.
That's right. My kids point out to me, Dad, it's not the anything.
Right. Yeah, so we do have Instagram and email.
Right.
The podcast, YouTube, audio on YouTube.
Right.
Is there any other platform we're on? Twitter? No, we're not.
No, we're not. We're not on Twitter.
Yeah.
But we do promote our podcast on Facebook and on
Facebook,
LinkedIn.
Yeah. Oh, right.
We
LinkedIn.
do right. And really, that's what what I'm seeing is that what you use TikTok for is really to promote it.
Right.
You're not going to have no one's going to listen to our podcast or even watch us on TikTok. It's too long.
Yeah, so to answer your question, in order to make money at a podcast, you have to have a sponsor, typically. There's 2 ways to make money that we know of. You can have sponsors, and so like a podcast I listen to is an automotive podcast, and they have a car cover company that's their
A what kind of company?
car cover. They make covers.
Okay, for the cars. Okay.
Yeah, and so they work that into every episode very naturally, and it's a really cool sponsorship.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can have a patron account where we would set it up, and then if you were kind and wanted to, you could donate to our patron account to help support the podcast.
That's right.
We don't have either one of those things
That's
set
right.
up at this point, because to have sponsors and advertisers, you really need to be pulling about 200 per episode, 200 listeners per episode.
Well, yeah. I mean, the other statistic I've seen is that you get paid per the 1,000.
Oh, really?
Per the 1,000.
Listeners?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Right. And so
Yeah.
they're not interested until you're
Yeah.
getting a couple thousand.
Yep. And so that's a little more difficult. Getting paid for a podcast is it's a little more difficult.
That's right. So it's one of the funny jokes I have with my managers, that he doesn't have to worry about me suddenly leaving the job because I've
For
become
podcasts. Yeah,
I've
yeah.
become a podcast host.
Yeah. So, not
The benefits are terrible too.
not that we're against making money. If we could come up with a sponsor, we would certainly do it.
Well, you and I, we talked about remember we had that long lunch one time, and we were talking about the podcast and kind of thinking about plans and topics to think about, and you said, man, I wish we could just do this full time. But the flip side to that is it'd just be you and I sitting around talking with each other. And that's not the beauty of this podcast, is the
Right.
conversations we have outside of these recordings
Right.
with other people.
Yes.
These conversations that you're having with people asking you about the podcast, the things that someone comes, says, "Did you know this?"
Right.
No, that don't sound right. Tell me more.
Right.
So it's those conversations I think we'd miss out on.
Oh, absolutely.
If we were just in the Campbell City studio trying to come up with 20 minutes of content a week.
It'd just be an echo chamber.
That's
just you
right.
and I.
That's right.
Yeah. So we do make a little money on merchandise.
Yes, that's right. In fact, we that's right. We supplemented some of our recording gear in order to do that.
Yep. And so we make a little money on merchandise, but we farm out all our merchandise to a company that handles all the
They
logistics.
do it all for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we make just a little bit on that.
Well, the beauty of it is we don't have to print 150,000 sweatshirts.
Right.
They'll just print them one at a time.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it does cost more, and we don't
Yeah.
we don't make nearly as much as if we printed 1,000. But we don't have to pony up 1,000.
Yeah. We don't have to ship
$10,000
them.
worth of money. Yeah, we don't have to ship them. We don't have to.
We don't have to do
We don't have to
returns
warehouse them in your carport because that would take up precious space for your ranchero.
for the project cars. All right. So this is one that you've gotten asked is, what is your topic?
Yeah, I get that, especially when I first tell them I have a podcast. The question is, so what's your topic, or what do you talk about? And so we have to kind of go through. I just explain the gist of it is that we're a podcast about talking the way we did before the internet, when you could not prove anyone right or wrong.
Right.
All the expertise was contained in the people in the conversation.
Yes.
And that's what it was.
That's
But
our
then,
topic.
and then the topic though, didn't, like we said at the very beginning, at the top of the episode, is it's generally something that would cause one of the other hosts to say, "Well, that don't sound right,"
Right.
or would cause you or a listener to really want to go Google. It's like, really?
Right.
Like when we had the episode about you could buy alcohol at Cracker Barrel.
Right.
Well, immediately someone wanted to Google, really, you can buy alcohol?
Yeah, I wanted
Now,
to Google
Some
it.
people probably said, oh, of course you could.
Yeah.
But if you really think about it, you never really could buy alcohol at Cracker Barrel until
right.
recently.
Yeah. No, it made me want to Google it. It was because that was one of the ones that you sprung on me.
Oh, those are my favorite. When you spring something on me or I spring something on you. So that's the other beautiful thing about the topic is one of us will run into the other person and we'll say, I've got something, but I'm not telling you. In fact,
Right.
I've got something in this bag over here.
Yeah, I'm interested in that.
I got
episode.
something in this bag that I want to show you. In fact, I want you to taste it.
Yeah,
But we're not going to do it because I want you to do the same thing. I want you to find some things.
I've got something.
Okay, you've got something.
Yeah,
All right.
it's not
that'll be
snack food, but I've got something.
Is it soup without a lot of garlic and chili powder?
The next question I think is people ask, how long have we been doing this, and how often? And we have done this a year and a half, going on 2 years.
Right. This is episode 77.
Yep. So like you said, 24 hours of content.
Right.
And we have, thank God, every week have dropped an episode.
Yeah, we've been able to record at least one.
Yeah.
Most of the time we record two. For a while we were doing 3 at a time.
That's the secret of podcasting, is that, we obviously record ahead sometimes. So is the podcast successful? This was my favorite.
I've never been asked that.
Yeah. So I was talking to a guy who was a former lighting designer on Broadway. Super interesting guy.
A lighting designer on Broadway.
Lighting designer, lighting engineer, kind of on the tech side of this.
Okay.
And the end of that conversation was, he was saying, "Does it make you happy?" I was like, "Yeah, it makes me happy." Well, then it's successful.
Oh, so wait. So the conversation was, you asked him. He asked you if it was successful.
I was asking him about what makes a successful podcast, or just anything artistic.
Okay.
And I was just kind of getting his opinion about the podcast. And after the
So he's
conversation,
listened to it.
He's listened to it.
Okay.
Yeah. And he said, "Does it make you happy?" I was like, "Yeah." I said, "Well, then it's successful."
Yeah, I would agree with him.
Yeah. I would too. It's been fun.
Yeah. I mean, I think another point of success or a measurement of success is, are you passionate about it?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think we are passionate about the idea of just having a conversation.
Yeah.
And spreading that around and having people emulate that.
Yeah. Now, I certainly would love if we had 1,000 more listeners. That would be cool. But
Yeah.
I'm completely happy with our 90 faithful listeners.
Exactly. And it's, because we have these moments where someone like Jake stumbles across it and says something, and wow.
Yeah.
And so, he is one of 100. He is now 1%. 1% of our listeners.
1%.
I mean, that's great.
It is. And, and I do see how it can become addicting, though. Like, I could see where...
You mean doing what we're doing here?
Well, yeah, just
because it's not listening.
Is
addicting necessarily.
Where you get addicted to the feedback.
Oh, yeah, right.
And seeing, like, are your numbers up? Are people saying good things? Like, when you told me we had a comment on YouTube, my first thing was like, was it a good comment?
Yeah, right.
It scared me a little bit.
Well, that's part of the whole like culture of social media, right? Getting your likes. I mean, we can easily fall into that too. How's our numbers? Are we getting likes?
Yeah.
Who's giving us 1 star on the Apple Podcast?
And, I think if listenership really drops off one day, it'll take me a minute to kind of adjust to that.
Right.
Yeah.
Would you still do it?
Yeah, I think I'd still do it.
Yeah,
I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think I'd still do it too.
Yeah. If even it's just you and me listening to it each week.
That's right. I mean, I need practice talking.
Yeah. It's and plus it's just fun to talk.
Right. I mean, this is really also it's a bit of a hobby because there's problems to solve. There's tactics to use to make it more listenable.
Yeah.
There's tactics to use to make it more relatable, and we are amateurs.
Absolutely.
And all we're doing is making ourselves better. We're just practicing. We're trying to improve things. We've been reading books. We've been listening to other podcasts about podcasting.
Right.
Just to help us with some tips and tricks.
And people have told me that it's gotten better.
Right.
Yeah, that we've improved. Yeah.
Yeah, and their feedback has also helped in that.
So, have you got any words of wisdom about podcasting?
Well, I think you and I talked about this in the Words of Wisdom is sometimes we do get asked, should I do a podcast?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
The answer is yes.
Yep.
It's really not that difficult. And we recorded a live episode with simply your phone.
Yeah.
That's
And
it.
Sounded good, I thought.
And it sounded pretty good.
Yeah.
There was a lot of background noise, but we were outside at a bar, and there was crickets and things chirping around. So,
Yeah.
but for the most part, the sound quality was fine. And so, if you have a topic that you're passionate about,
Yeah.
and if you have a topic, if you have a topic that you're passionate about,
Yeah.
then go for it. There's nothing. What's holding you back?
I had somebody at work say they wanted to do a podcast, and I said, absolutely. Find a platform, and the technology's so good now. I mean, there's so many things that are just so plug and play and easy to access. It's just just do it.
Oh, right. Because
Yeah.
you've taught yourself how to post this up to the platform.
Yeah.
And you've taught yourself how to make it go out to all the other podcasting platforms, right?
Yeah.
You've done this.
Yeah.
I mean, Cecil is our sound engineer. He has done this.
Yeah, and it's they make it very easy for you to do a lot of these things.
Right.
You don't have to. I know I was going to say earlier is that we were saying that whether would we keep doing this or not, and we'd probably just keep doing it. I said we're really like the ham radio operators of the '70s.
Kind of right. We're just
Yeah.
talking out to the space, right?
Right. Where people would put those big antennas up and kind of figure out how to do the ham radio and talk to somebody in Australia.
Yeah, that is a really good parallel. And the difference is, one of the differences, no one's going to talk back. Although it's not entirely accurate, people send us messages, like Jake.
Like Jake.
And the thing is, people don't have to tune in at the right time. They can
That's
tune
right.
in whenever they want.
Right. And the technical expertise, you don't have to have a ham radio
Right, you don't
With
have
the
to have a
antenna 20 feet up in there.
20-foot antenna,
Yeah.
broadcasting.
Understanding a little bit about radio, you can just go on the Apple Podcast and hear our podcast.
There you go.
Yeah, so it may not sound right. I think that's the end of our podcast about podcasting.
Well, before we close, we want to thank everyone again for listening. If this was your first time and enjoyed the conversation, would you consider hitting the subscribe button? That's located in the upper right-hand corner on Apple Podcasts. It's a little check mark. Also consider giving us a rating or just leaving us a review.
So That Don't Sound Right is a production of TDSR Podcast in conjunction with Camel City Studios. I'm your co-host and sound engineer, Cecil. Peter is your other host, and he is our web designer. Speaking of someone who's learned something from scratch.
That's right, we learned that too.
Emily is our graphic designer, and she is actually really good at what she does.
She's a pro.
She's not a rank amateur like the rest of us. Giorgio is our merchandise tester. Brent is our brand ambassador. And as always, listener number one is Scott. So until next Saturday night, keep talking.
And stay curious.